Hello and welcome to EDUTALK with Happiness. Today we're going to talk about simplifying special education. This is a podcast where we talk about special education out of the world of complicated terminology, confusing paperwork, and overwhelming meetings, and make it understandable, practical, and manageable. So, whether you're a parent trying to understand your child's IEP, a general education teacher wondering what all those accommodations actually mean, or a special education teacher trying to balance paperwork, instruction, progress monitoring, and communication, this podcast is for you. So, I'm glad you are here. And since we're starting a new school year, I wanted to start with something very important. Special education should not feel like foreign language, but sometimes it does. So there are acronyms, there are meetings, there are evaluations, so many other things like goals, accommodations, services, forms, and sometimes after reading an IEP, you may have more questions than answers. So today we're going to slow it down. We're going to simplify it. So let's start with most basic question. What is special education? At its heart, special education is about providing special design instruction and support so that the students with disabilities can access education and make meaningful progress. That's the important part. It's about the student, not the paperwork, not the label, not the diagnosis, the student. So every student who receives special education services is an individual first. Two students can have the same disability category and have completely different strengths, needs, personalities, interests, and learning styles. That's why we don't want to look at the disability label and assume that we know everything about a child. Instead, we want to ask, who is this student? What are they good at? What motivates them? Where are they struggling? What helps them learn? What gets in the way? And what can we do differently to help them succeed? Here is something I want both parents and teachers to remember. A medical diagnosis and an educational need are not necessarily the same thing. The child may have a diagnosis, but the school team still has to look at how the student needs affect their education. And on the other hand, a teacher may notice that a student is struggling academically, behaviorally, socially, or functionally. But that doesn't automatically mean the student needs special education. That's why evaluation and team decision making are so important. We want to understand the whole picture. For parents, this can sometimes be frustrating. You might think, my child has a diagnosis. Why isn't that enough? And that's an understandable question. But schools are looking at the educational impact and the supports the student needs in order to access and benefit from education. That's why communication between parents and educators is so important. Parents bring information about the child that teachers may not see. Teachers bring information about the child that the parents may not see. When we put those pieces together, we get a much clearer picture. So, what's an IEP? Now, let's talk about one of the biggest pieces of special education, the IEP. IEP stands for Individualized Education Program. And I want to emphasize one word, individualized. The IEP is supposed to be about one particular student, not a generic student, not the student's disability category, not what worked for another child. This child. An IEP describes the student's educational needs and the support, services, and goals designed to address those needs. It can include information about the student's present levels of performance, annual goals, accommodations, modifications, special education services, related services, participation in general education, progress monitoring, and other information relevant to the student's educational program. That's a lot. And if you're a parent looking at an IEP for the first time, it can feel overwhelming. If you're a general education teacher receiving several IEPs, at the beginning of the school year. It can feel overwhelming too. So here's my advice: don't try to memorize everything. Start with essentials. Ask, what are the students' strengths? What are the students' biggest needs? What are the goals? What accommodations or modifications are required? What services are being provided? And what do I need to do differently in my classroom? Those questions can help turn a giant document into something much more usable. So, now let's briefly talk about another term you may hear: 504 plan. A 504 plan is different from an IEP. A 504 plan generally provides accommodations designed to give a student with a disability equal access to education. An IEP, on the other hand, is associated with special education eligibility and can include specially designed instruction and related services. The important thing isn't about memorizing the definitions. The important thing is understanding that students can need different types of support. And again, the support should match the student's needs. So, who's on the team? Let's talk about the people involved. Special education is a team effort. Depending on the student and the situation, the team can include parents, general education teachers, special education teachers, school administrators, related services providers, evaluation personnel, and others. And each person brings something different to the table. The parent knows the child. The general education teacher understands the student's performance in general education environment. The special education teacher brings expertise in specially designed instruction and disability related supports. Related service providers bring their professional expertise. Administrators help make sure the school can implement the student's program. The goal shouldn't be who gets to make the decision. The goal should be, what does the student need and how can we work together to provide it. Let's imagine a teacher. Let's say Miss Johnson. It's the first week of school. She has 28 students. Three students have IEPs, two have 504 plans. She has emails to answer, lesson plans to write, classroom routines to establish, and paperwork everywhere. And she looks at one student's IEP and thinks, where do I even start? If you're a teacher, you may have been there. Here's where I tell Miss Johnson to start. Don't start by trying to read the IEP 5 times. Start with a one-page mental snapshot. Ask, what does this student do well? Maybe the student is an excellent verbal communicator. Maybe they love science. Maybe they are creative. Maybe they're incredibly helpful to classmates. Then ask, where does this student need support? Maybe reading comprehension is difficult. Maybe writing is challenging. Maybe transitions are difficult. Maybe they need help staying organized. Then ask, what does the IEP tell me to do? Maybe the student needs extended time. Maybe directions need to be repeated or clarified. Maybe the student needs access to assisted technology. Maybe assignments need to be broken down into steps. Now, the IEP starts becoming useful. It's no longer just a document, it's information about the student sitting in front of you. Now, let's switch perspectives. Imagine you're a parent. You receive an IEP and you're looking at pages of information. You see phrases like present levels, annual goals, list restricted environment, specially designed instruction, progress monitoring, and you're thinking, what does this all actually mean for my child? Here's my advice: ask questions. You don't have to know all the terminology before you participate. You can say, can you explain that in plain language? You can say, what does this look like in the classroom? You can ask, how will I know whether my child is making progress? You can ask, what happens if this support isn't working? Those are reasonable questions. Parents don't have to be special education experts to be effective advocates, and teachers don't have to have every answer either. Sometimes the best answer is, I'm not sure. Let me find out. That's collaboration. So let's tackle a few common myths. Special education means a student isn't capable. Absolutely not. Students receiving special education services have strengths, talents, interests, and potential just like every other student. The purpose of support is to help students access learning, not to put a ceiling on what they can accomplish. So, myth number two, the special education teacher is responsible for everything. No, special education is a team responsibility. General education teachers, special education teachers, administrators, related service providers, and families all have important roles. So, another myth is an IEP means the student gets easier work. Not necessarily. Accommodations can change how a student accesses or demonstrates learning without changing the learning expectation. So, modifications can change expectations. Those are different things. And we'll talk about that later in the series. Another myth is parents are either advocates or difficult. No, parents are advocates because they care about their children, and teachers can advocate too. So, the best situation is when everyone sees themselves as an advocate for the student. So, let's simplify this. It's time for our first Simplify It segment. If you remember nothing else from today's episode, remember these three things. Number one, start with the student, not the disability. Ask who the student is, what they do well, and what they need. Number two, the IEP is a roadmap. You don't have to memorize every word. Focus on the student's needs, goals, services, and required supports. Number three, you don't have to navigate special education alone. Teachers and parents have different perspectives, and that's a strength. So here's your challenge before our next episode. If you're a teacher, choose one student you support and ask yourself, what is one strength this student begins or brings? So here is your challenge before our next episode. If you're a teacher, choose one student you support and ask yourself, what is one strength this student brings to my classroom? Then ask, what is one barrier I can help remove? If you're a parent, ask, what is one thing about my child that I want the school team to understand this year? Write it down, bring it to your next conversation with the school. Sometimes one piece of information can change how we understand a student. And that's our first episode of this school year. Today, we talked about what special education is, what an IEP is, the difference between an IEP and a 504 plan, who makes up the team, and why parents and educators both play such important role. But we're just starting. In our next episode, we're going to take a deeper dive into the IEP. We're going to break it down section by section and talk about what teachers and parents really need to know. Because an IEP shouldn't be something you simply sign, file away, and forget about. It should be a working document that helps the team understand where is the student now, where are we trying to go to, and what are we going to do to help them get there. Thank you for joining me. Remember, special education doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes we just need to slow down, ask questions, and simplify it. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.